Yo, welcome in everybody, and today I am hyped. I mean, this is going to be a spicy video and a ton of fun. We are tier listing all Call of Duty pros and AMs heading into roster mania. And obviously we do this a lot around here, but today's going to be way different. So it's crucial that you guys watch this intro to know the differences, so you don't just skip to the end and see the tier list and be like, yo, what in the world is this? So this is gonna be a lot different than normal, so make sure to watch this intro. But as we talk right now, roster mania is going down. The DMs are being sent, the mind-blown tweets are on the timeline, the down bad tweets are on the timeline. We got a lot to kind of sort through with roster mania. Of course, yesterday on the podcast, we did our first official predictions for roster mania, so I highly recommend checking that video out as well. But today, tier list in all COD pros, and so it's gonna be a blast. Without further ado, let's get right into this one and talk about how we're doing this. Let's go. Alrighty, so nothing too crazy with the template itself. We've got the S through E tier again, nothing crazy, but what gets really crazy is that we're gonna have way more players on this tier list than before. So, you know, that means the number of players in each tier is gonna have to be significantly different. Obviously, since we're gonna be having a ton of amateur players, that means the bottom of the tier list is gonna have probably a lot more players than the top of the tier list, because again, we're using some of these amateur players. Obviously, there's infinite amounts of amateur players, so naturally, you know, we're gonna have more players near the bottom of this tier list than near the top. So how we're gonna be sorting this is we're gonna be aiming for 10 players in the S tier. We're gonna be aiming for only 10 players in the A tier. So I guess technically we're ranking the top 10 players, then the top 10 through 20. Then we're gonna be aiming for like between 10 and 15 in the B tier. So somewhere around like 12, 13, 14. And then we'll see what happens with the rest of the tiers. So also, this will also correlate pretty well with roster mania. I've already sorted out the majority of these players, and so we'll just be going through them and revealing them one by one and talking about each player and why they're where they're at. So this is gonna correlate pretty well with roster mania, where the top 3 tiers are gonna be pretty locked into rosters heading into next year. Then the C tier will be guys who should have a roster, but may not. And then the D and E tier players are guys who have a chance to be on a roster, guys who I think have some potential, but they're still a little risky to take a shot on, or may not have the upside compared to some of the other players. So just kind of that debate, and we'll be going through it in that sense. So it's just a lot different than our normal mid-season tier list, where we're only tier ranking the 48 COD pros that are starting right now. So, and then of course, the final massive X factor, besides just the tiers and the players that makes a difference for this tier list, is that we're heading into COD Vanguard. So obviously we're tier listing based off of the recent performances of these players, but also you have to take into consideration all of the other factors. And I talked about this in my top 15 players before CoD Champs video, so go watch that. It was a long video, it was like an hour long. Watch the first like 20 minutes or so, because I did like a little breakdown video of all the things I take into consideration with ranking players, and that's all important in this video as well. And heading into Vanguard, obviously we have to take into account their Cold War performance, of course, but you also have to consider some other factors, their history, the things that they've done like in past games. Obviously we're now in 4v4, but we're also heading into a game very similar with movement and gunplay to Modern Warfare, but now it's 4v4. So there is a lot of tough X factors that make it a little bit more difficult to rank players. And so I'm sure the comments will be spicy and hot with this video and with this ranking, because everyone's gonna have their different opinions on certain players' upside with a new game in mind. So those are all the tough things. We're gonna have some fun with it, but without further ado, let's finally get into ranking our first player. We're gonna start with the 48 players who were on starting rosters at the end of the year, and then go into the guys who were benched or other guys like that. So without further ado, number 1 off the rip here is Gunless, and he is in the B tier. He's right there near the fringe of the A tier. He's right outside that top 20. He's right in there. He brings so much to the team. He has a ton of upside. He's a true flex. He did a lot for Seattle, and we saw him emerge at points throughout the year. At times in like stage 3, he had some really impressive maps, especially on Raid and on Checkmate. And then near the end of the year on LAN, we saw Seattle make that run, and Gunless was a big reason for that. So I still think Gunless has a lot of legit potential to be a championship player, and he's right there in the B tier for now. So up next, we got Vivid, and we're gonna be throwing him in the B tier as well. At the end of the season, we saw in stage 4, he really, once he joined Empire, started getting his groove. We saw it in the stage 4 major, where he played very, very well. Then back online, Dallas was struggling again, And there were some question marks about Vivid and his role on the team, but then heading into Champs, he played great. He looked really, really good at Champs. Obviously, Dallas ended up finishing top 4 or top 3 and just looking great. So I think Vivid is a great player in this league and has a real spot and a real bright future still ahead of him with learning some more, like ironing out his basics in communication and positioning and respawn and patience in respawn and how to work his aggressive nature in with a team and molding, you know, his gameplay to fit those squads. I really think Vivid has a lot of individual potential, and staying on Dallas makes a lot of sense for him to maximize his individual potential as well. So Kenny's up next. He's our first A tier player. We'll move him up to the front here. I really like Kenny as a player, man. He is fantastic. And we've even seen him now maximize himself as a flex as well this year with the Krig in hand and the 74U at times. And he was great, man, but with both weapons. And I thought we saw some improvement with him as the year went along as well, with how their team improved too. And he was a consistent mainstay for LAT even throughout all the roster changes, which, you know, with that many roster changes puts you in a pretty tough spot to succeed individually, even at times. And Kenny really did a great job of that. And I think he's a transcendent type of talent that can win on a lot of different teams. And so all that goes to say, Kenny's a beast. I really, really think Kenny can transcend, you know, game and launches of different games and titles and just be a great player, a mainstay player for a team on a championship type squad. So the next player up is Kleenex. And oh, look at that. He fit in perfectly here. But Kleenex, obviously with Toronto, there's a debate for him to be in the S tier. I mean, he has been as good as it gets with Toronto finishing now second, of course, in the CDL. Absolutely nuts with CoD Champs, and Toronto and Kleenex has some awesome moments individually, and he played great, man. I love Kleenex as a player, and you're gonna see some of the company here inside the A tier is no joke. There's a lot of talent here, and just because he barely missed out on the S tier does not mean that he's not a great player, because that is definitely the case. Kleenex is a unit. He's so ratty. He is so aggressive. He pushes the pace on the map. He gets in your face. He plays so fast, but yet he also has fantastic gun skill, and he's a playmaker around the map. Again, I could talk about all these players for a long time, but if we get too in depth on any of them, we're gonna be here for 2 hours. So next player up is Afro. And I decided to go with the B tier for Afro, which might be a little hot compared to what some people might think of him. And I know some people are really high on Afro. And so this feels I get a little bit nervous putting him inside the B tier this early in the video because people are gonna freak out. But I think when you see by the end of the video, I think you'll kind of get a better feel for all the players that are in the B tier. But Afro had some pop-off plays near the end of the year. And even on a team that was struggling, there was times where he popped these 3 pieces and 4 pieces, had some clutches, insertion, destroy, where you were like, oh man, this player might be special. This dude might be a legit player in the CDL. And so I'm kind of putting my neck out there. I'm kind of sticking my neck out for Afro. And I think this guy could be a legit player, a legit stud in the CDL. So I'm going to have him in the B tier with some really great players like Gunless and Vivid and some other players that you're going to see here as well. I think Afro has some legit potential to impress here heading into Vanguard, and I'm really hoping that talent that we saw in Cold War, those flashes, can translate to consistency here in the upcoming year as well. So Paul X, speaking of London Royal Ravens, is the next guy up on the list here. I decided to throw him in the C tier. So I can see this being a hot take with there being a tier difference between Paul X and Afro. I think Paul's right on the fringe there, but Afro, I was just beyond impressed with the upside plays that we saw from him. And Paul X had those moments, but that was especially in insertion destroy for Paul X. Respawn wasn't as impressive, and so that's where I at least have a little bit more hesitation with Paul versus Afro, where earlier on, right when he joined the roster, we saw Paul fry like on Apocalypse a few times and things like that. But I think as the year went on, the upside slang for Paul with an AR in hand didn't seem to be there. And so that's why I was just a little hesitant with him versus Afro, and why he's on the C tier, where I'm still pretty confident Paul's gonna get a team this year for Cold War. But I don't think he's a lock. Whereas, I mean, Afro's a lock for London Royal Ravens at this point. So there's still some fantastic players in the C tier. That's for sure. So next guy up on the list is Havoc, and he's in the C tier as well. So I guess I can move these guys up a little bit here. But I mean, obviously with Havoc, when he came into the lineup for Florida again, we saw his leadership, his his in-game calls, his all of his intangibles really showed out for Florida and helped organize the troops a little bit, made him a little bit more consistent performing, which was still not consistent with that roster. But overall, I think Havoc can still be a very, very quality player in the CDL. And like when we get into the C tier here, you're looking for like that third or fourth player on a roster to kind of be like a reliable core player for a team, paired with high upside players to create a championship roster. And again, like a guy like Bance last year was a C tier type player, and then he elevated this year to being an elite player in the CDL on an elite team in the CDL because of the situation and the intangibles that he brings to the team with the leadership, the communication, and overall just the reliable play from a guy like that on Toronto. So you can still have some championship players here in the C tier. And I think Havoc could definitely be one of those guys. So Illy's next guy on the list. I got him in the B tier. I think at the end of the year here, we finally started seeing that upside again for Illy as a player with Dallas. It took a while to get back to that point after the struggle start for Illy at the beginning of the year. It was really, really rough in those first, 2, maybe even 3 stages. But in stage 4, where they finished top 2, and then at Champs, where they finished top 3, Illy was very, 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 very good for that team. And I loved everything I saw from Illy at CoD Champs. And that convinced me that he is definitely back up here inside the top 3 tiers for sure. And of course, he's going to be on a team next year as well. So Illy's an absolute unit. So Pristini's up next. He's interesting. So I think he's hiding here behind Paul X. So Pristini is in the C tier. And there's a handful of reasons for why. Obviously, I don't think he's guaranteed a roster next year, but that doesn't necessarily affect my ranking. But I'm just saying, like, he's kind of in that tier of players right now where it's just unfortunate, where he has to find the right squad of 4. And with the right squad of 4, I think Pristini can be an incredibly valuable player. He can be that Bance player where in the right squad, he can fry and be a beast. But Seattle was not that right team for him. And so it's hard to exactly see what that team would look like with the situations right now. And so to maximize Pristini's performance, I'm not sure if I see the clear path for it at this point. But that could change with ROSTERMANIA and those things. So again, he's obviously a fast-paced player. He brings a lot of aggression, a lot of those things that Vivid brings. But what we saw from Vivid was a little bit more upside in S&D at the end of the year. And inside Control, Vivid was a little bit more consistent. Whereas Pristini, yes, he makes those crazy plays. But also, we've seen him give away his life a lot. And we know that's been a consistent criticism for Pristini. But I think you got to pair him with another insanely fast-paced player. And that was never really the case for them on Seattle this year, where you had Classic, which he's pretty good. And we saw the success with Seattle there at the end of the year where they beat FaZe, at the stage 5 major. So, there's those types of situations where Pristini can start seeing that upside if you pair him with the right squad of 4. But I don't think he's a transcendent individual talent right now, whereas some of the guys up on the list, the S tier, the A tier kind of are. So you have to have the right squad around Pristini, and he can be a great player. That's why he's in C. So Temp is up next, and he is here in the C tier. Temp is an interesting case because we saw him back in BO4 earlier on in his career, where he was a literal unit on the map. He was unkillable at times. He was a beast, an absolute slayer. Now we've seen him transition a little bit more towards that AR, flexing for Paris, running that AR, and I'll be interested to see exactly what that looks like for Temp heading into this season in ROSTERMANIA and whether he finds a team or not. So he's definitely on that fringe of players as well. And it might depend on what players, end up getting that spot and build that squads for the teams like, maybe Paris or Seattle or those types of teams, or maybe LAG. With those types of rosters. And he was, one of those guys last year who was also struggled to find a team until LAT picked him up, of course. But I still think Temp has a lot of untapped potential here in 4v4 again. We got to see him on an AR, and we need to see him with an aggro sub, maybe two very aggro subs to get out in front. And you need to pair him with guys who can really win those gunfights. And if you have him coming in to clean up the mess and really slay as a slaying AR, I think that's where you can see Temp absolutely dominate. But he's got to have that right situation, and that's why he's in the C tier here as a guy who needs the right guys around him too. So Abizi's up on the next list. Obviously, I mean, Abizi is an S tier player. That's facts. It's guaranteed. Faces CoD Champions. Abizi was one of the best players in the CDL for the past 3 years now. And I mean, Abizi, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. He's a top 2 player in the CDL for sure. That's a lock. And he's unbelievable. There's nothing else to say. Assault is next, and we ended up putting him inside the E tier here. I mean, he had his struggles this season. There's no hiding that. So I decided to throw him in the E tier as an AR, and again, also with the being a main AR, it gets really tough when you start considering all the other amateur players that you could consider in the E and D tier. And so as we move along in this list, you're gonna kind of see probably where there's just a lot of options for main ARs down there in the E and D tiers. And so we'll see. All right, Classic's up next. Threw him in the D tier. We saw the improvement from Classic at the end of this season, where I was really happy with Classic and how he played on Seattle. And that's the upside for him as a player, being that 4th player on a team who can elevate themselves because of their team play and how they play as a squad of 4. It's hard to see him being like a transcendent talent at this point in his career where he can elevate and be like a mainstay Slayer, a mainstay main SMG for a team. So like I said, I see him as that 4th player to pair with 3 other very good players as a veteran leader on a squad where he can then be a legit valuable asset and win and be a contributor on a winning team. So that's why Classic's kind of in that D tier right here. So next up we got Scraps. Similar spot with Classic, very similar argument for him. We're throwing him in the D tier where he has upside. I think maybe even a little bit more upside than even Classic does as a Slayer. And we saw that in the past with Scraps. I mean, dating back to BO4 as an elite Slayer in the CDL. I mean, he has been great in his career. We've seen him a lot better in S&D lately, and that's been huge for him. When you look at him compared to some of the other guys in the list, I can see the argument for him being here in the D tier. So obviously, next guy up, I mean, hello, Mr. MVP. We got Simp. So Simp and Abizi here are at the top inside the S tier. I mean, they could be in a tier of their own, honestly. The tiny terrorist tier, the TT tier. But overall, he's a unit. And look at that. Look who we have up next, Celium. I mean, we're gonna put all the demons here at the top. In my opinion, they're the 3 best players in the CDL, and that's why I had them in the top 15 players heading into CoD Champs. 1, 2, 3 on my list, and they're all literally unreal. They make the best plays in the world every single time. They're insane. And again, I would love to talk about these guys all day, but we're already like 20 minutes into this video, and we have so many more players to go. Neptune's up next, and I have him in the B tier. I thought we saw enough from him to be a B tier player, and I think he's in a really good spot for ROSTERMANIA heading into next year to really capitalize on his upside as a player. His S&D was great. His respawns really improved, and we saw the slaying upside for him at times on the season with the really good S&D performances in the second half of the year. So I like Neptune a lot. He's a really solid player. I'm excited to see him in the future as well. So RC's up next. He's also an S tier player. Ironically, that our first 4 S tier, I randomized this list. So the four S tier players off the rip are the 4 phase guys, which, I mean, to be fair, is fair for how they played. Formal's up next. And I'm going to throw him in the B tier here, where with a lot of very solid players. We're going to see even more impressive players here in the B tier moving forward as well. Formal struggled the end of last season. And, you know, we saw Texas Formal at the end of Modern Warfare. We saw Lanimal Formal at the beginning of the year. After the XM4 got GA'd, the Optic really struggled Formal really struggled to find his slang groove again and never really came back. Where we saw Dashie have the high upside slang, we saw Envoy do it, we saw Scump do it, but we never saw really Formal get back to that point, except for that checkmate control at Champs where he went on that 11 spree and was absolutely frying. And I still think he has a lot of potential to be a great player, and obviously he's a championship caliber player. Hello, duh. So we'll keep him in the B tier for now. Shotzi's up next. I mean, he's an S tier player. There's no ifs, ands, or buts either. He's a beast. He's the best movement in the CDL. He's a freak on the map. He can do it all across all 3 game modes. Shotzi's a beast. Oh, we got another S tier player off the rip here. Hydra. Same exact thing. This guy's a unit. And I mean, in our first predictions video for ROSTERMANIA, we had them teaming together. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But there is some interest there with these guys. and the potential for Shotzi in ROSTERMANIA, Hydra in ROSTERMANIA. I'm excited. But again, same thing, cross all 3 game modes, they're units. He's a lock inside the S tier for me. And we saw that upside for Hydra at the beginning of Champs, even with a roster change team who's just coming off of multiple roster changes with Clay leaving, then coming back. Hydra still shined as an elite player in the CDL. And I think that the ceiling for Hydra moving into Modern Warfare is unlimited. This guy's a beast, and I'm excited to see him play. So Bance is up next. Whoops. Bance is up next. I have him in the B tier as well. Benjamin Bance, the purple assassin. He's a unit. I love the intangibles for Bance. He's a winner. He just is. And we saw that with Toronto, his communication, his leadership, and every listen in. I always came away from every single listen in like, I'm so impressed with Bance. And not only that, we saw him fry at Champs and look unbelievable. So Bance is, I could see someone argue for him being an A tier player. I would have no problem with that. Benjamin Bance is a beast. Apathy's up next, and I had a tough go with Apathy in the C or D tiers. I was kind of going back and forth with him. I ended up going with the D tier just because of the struggles with LAG, and we just didn't see that upside for him in that second half of the year, except for that Apocalypse hardpoint at the end of the year where Daddy App was frying, and I was hyped, I was clapping, I was getting going, I was pumped for him. But I really hope he can make it happen. I hope he finds a squad. I want him to find a squad, but it's not looking good for him, man. I really hope he finds a squad. That's all I gotta say. I vouch for him. Standy up next, S tier. He's back, baby. Top 10 player in the CDL. We've already got, what, 7 of our 10 players in the S tier already, so we're really packing in these S tier players here. But, I mean, dude, did you watch Champs? Did you watch Stage 5? I mean, unreal. Unreal plays from Standy, and he solidified himself on the biggest stage that he's a beast. And I mean, really, like I said in my predictions video before, or in my breakdown video, that Rocker definitely proved me wrong. I thought they would get top 6. They ended up getting top 4, and they pulled it out in some really impressive matches there. Rocker looked great. Standy looked great. He's a playmaker. He's a beast, and he's heading into ROSTERMANIA locked in as a top 10 player in the CDL. Mac is up next, and I have Mac here in the B tier. I think Mac is a very, very good player, and deserving starter in the CDL. His spot in ROSTERMANIA is very interesting because it feels like New York wants to move on from him, but I think he deserves a spot in the CDL. So we'll see where he ends up. We had him going to Seattle in our predictions video. Spoiler, by the way. Again, go watch that after this video. But he'll be an interesting one for sure as well. And I think Mac brings a lot to a team as a flex, and he really is a true flex in the CDL, and those are hard to come by. So I think a team should be picking up Mac as a starter for sure. Mac and Gunless are 2 premier flexes I think can really be great additions to a team. And speaking of premier flexes, Prista. He's earned his way back into the A tier. What a turnaround for Prista, man. Gotta be so happy for Preston, for P-Dog, because, I mean, at the beginning of the year, it was a tough go. And I was like, man, dude, he's playing terrible. He's playing horrible. And so I think I dropped him down to like maybe the C tier at one point throughout the year. Then he moved back up to the B tier. Then he moved back up to the A tier, and here he is again. So excited to see Prista rocking and rolling here into ROSTERMANIA. He saw the value that he brings to the rocker on this team, the consistency now with figuring, it took him a while to figure out this game, but once they figured out this game, Rocker were dangerous and they were deadly. And I think now heading back into another 4v4 title on Vanguard with Prista, how good he was in Modern Warfare as well. I mean, Priest is locked and loaded to be an elite player heading into Vanguard as well. And I'm excited for it, man. I really, really am. So up next, Major Maniac as well. Same thing. He was on the fringe of A tier for me with after how great he played at Champs. I mean, dude, bro, Major Maniac, what got into him? He was possessed by the spirit of the Tiny Terrors. He was frying at Champs. And so you got to be hyped for Mike, man. He's the guy that I think we all slept on throughout the year. I doubted at one point in stage 4, wasn't sure if this roster was going to work with Major Maniac on it or not when they made the change. And here we are. They're great. And Major Maniac's awesome. And it was a ton of fun to see him fry at Champs, to say the least. Asim's next guy as well. He's in the B tier. So we're really packing the B tier now with some of these guys. But Asim's right there with again, the right situation. Asim can be an A tier player. We saw Asim struggle a little bit, especially in hard points in that second half of the year. after his dominant like stage 3 performance. So in stage 4, stage 5, and champs, it was definitely a little bit more inconsistent from ASIM. But we still see the upside from him as a player. And again, once in a while, he gets a little bit too aggressive. He pushes a few things where you're like, I don't know about that one. But overall, still a great player. I'm excited to see what he can do here and the potential that he has as a player too. So Draza's up next. I think he might be hiding. There he is. Draza's up next, and I'm throwing him in the B tier too. So we just got a ton of B tier players here apparently at this point. So Draza has a ton of upside. And this is a guy who heading into next season with, let's say he ends up with that roster, a spoiler, that we think are going to end up with Draza, Kenny, Octane, and then either like a Hook or another SMG like ASIM, maybe Prista, and you work with the SMGs in that sense. There's a lot of ways that could fall out for him. And I think Draza could really shine next year with a squad like that. And he's a guy you got to watch out for an A tier player next year because Draza could be nice with it, to say the least. So John is up next, and I ended up throwing him inside the D tier after the beyond disappointing CoD Champs. I still could see an argument for him being in the C tier, and I'd have no problem with somebody putting him in the C tier because I want him to be in a CDL. He's a guy I really like. I want him to be in a CDL. And look at that. We have Apathy and John next to each other, man. Two goats, two absolute goats of CoD. And so it sucks seeing him down there in the D tier. That's worst case scenario for me. I just really hope that he can rebound. There was a lot of question marks after that performance at Champs, and like he was just losing gunfights. And you're like, what's happening here? It sucks. It had to go like that way for him. It's going to really hurt his stock, I think, heading into ROSTERMANIA. And so I'm not sure if he's going to find a team, man. I'm just not. And that just sucks. So, well, hopefully John can bounce back, fry in the MC to get next year and get another chance in the CDL. So we'll see. Alrighty, so next player up is Attach. I mean, he's an A tier player after what we saw in stage 5 and Champs. Dude, the dude's, not only did he live up to his aura or his reputation as the clutchest player in the CDL, but he's nasty with it. And that's just great, man. It's facts. And I've been high on Attach really since last year as a guy who I've had near my fringe A tier for a long time and or right inside the A tier for a lot of my tier list videos the past year and a half. And Attach is right there, the best players in the CDL. He's a beast. So again, we got to keep moving or else we are never going to finish this video. So Silly's up next. He had a tough few weeks and let's throw him in the E tier for now. Hopefully he can bounce back, man. I think with the Krig in hand as an AR, he can really be still can be a good player, but it's just not working for him. So another LAG guy, we got Mental. I think we're going to throw him in the E tier. I mean, that APOC hardpoint was at least interesting, with at least showing him as a slayer, like a legit slayer for the first time, and something that gets me at least excited about what could be for him in the future. But for now, we'll leave him in the E tier as well. Slasher, I think he's earned his way back up inside the B tier for sure. He's a beast. Playing on LAN, he played really well at Champs, even in their one series, and so that was exciting to see. And I think he's going to be in a great spot heading into next year as well. Although roster spots are a little bit weird for him for sure. So Crim's there as well. B tier for Crim, I think makes a lot of sense. Still a beast. I could see him being in the A tier after the leadership that he showed with that team. I'd be okay with him being in the A tier if someone wanted to put him there, but there's just a lot of really dang good players in the CDL, so that's why he's in the B tier. So Clay's up next. I'm gonna be throwing Clay in the A tier. Seeing the run that New York made after him coming back with that squad of 4, I think Clay is really valuable to the team, and we saw him on the season make a huge impact, keep this team inside the top 4. I could have no problem with somebody putting Crim above Clay. I think both of them are like interchangeable here with the A, B tiers near the top of the B or the bottom of the A. I'll give Clay the nod because of his season-long success, his consistency on the year, and his individual play. I mean, he was really good individually on the season. Envoy up next. I'm keeping him inside the A tier. I know some people would argue, the Optic fans who would throw him under the bus would say, you know, he's pushing the flank too much. He's getting caught on his own too much. He's getting isolated on the map. He's not playing with his teammates or whatever, which there are some fair criticisms to that at times, but we still see the playmaking ability inside of hardpoint and control consistently with Envoy. Yes, he does get isolated from his team sometimes in search and destroy, and that can be a problem, but he also makes a lot of dang plays in S&D, and the teamwork overall for Optic's a real problem. It's not just Envoy. And that's also part of it. And we talked a lot about that on the podcast. Again, I'm summarizing massive arguments that we're making, like 10-minute long arguments in like 30 seconds. But Envoy is an A tier player in my head. He's an absolute beast. Awakening's up next. He's a fringe A tier guy. I love Awakening. You guys know that. I think he's a really, really, really good player. And I'm keeping him inside the B tier. There's just some question marks exactly with how this team succeeded at the end. And so that's why I don't have both Skies and Awakening in the A tier. I feel like one of them needed to drop down. And I decided to go with Awakening there. Spoiler, because we haven't got the Skies yet. But Awakening as that guy dropping down to the B tier. Overall, the consistency has been a little bit questionable, and we saw the upside slaying for Skies as well later on in this year that we didn't necessarily see for Awakening. So Octane's up next, and I mean, I think this guy's a beast. I've always thought Octane's a beast. I had to drop him down, you know, during the year just because they were struggling at times, and there were so many other guys that were playing so well. It was more like the other guys rose to the top, but Octane is as consistent as it gets. The turret, the human turret, and he shoots as straight as anybody. Not only that, I really, really believe in him as a transcendent talent from game to game to game to be an elite player in the CDL. And I just think that's the case. So Octane is inside the A tier for sure, heading into Vanguard. We got Dashie up next. Dashie's the optic player that I have in the S tier. Overall, again, when it comes to transcendent talent and then balanced across all 3 game modes, that's where he has the advantage over Scump. You know, we'll talk about Scump in a second here, but he's been great in S&D. He's been great in hardpoint and control on the season. And I really think, again, when it comes to transcendent talents who I believe and have a lot of faith in heading into Cold War, he's right, or I'm sorry, into Vanguard with basically, you know, anybody else in CDL, he's right there with the best of them. And Scump is so close to that as well. So don't get mad, Optic fans. Don't get mad. Don't get mad. Insight's up next. I decided to throw him in the S tier as well. I feel like he has a pretty dang good argument for that. On the season, he is a top 5 S&D player. He was elite in respawn on the year as well. Not to mention when he came into the league, he's the rookie of the year. He has a debate for MVP as well. He's fantastic. Insight, you know, Toronto would not be where they are without the positioning, the anchoring ability, like not the anchoring in the sense of the game, but the anchoring, like anchoring their team around Insight, and how he plays around the map is elite. He's patient. He's fantastic. His positioning is so good, and I love everything about Insight as well. So next up is Aqua, and I think Aqua's a guy who could easily find his way onto another team here. And I think he has untapped potential, something that we haven't seen enough of the past 2-3 years. I like Aqua a lot and maybe higher on him than some people might be. Like I could see some people having him in the D tier, which I think is fair, but I think Aqua can really still be a contributing player in the CDL. So I would keep him inside the C tier for sure. So Cammy's up next. I mean, my goodness, he's established himself as a top 10 player in the CDL. That is for sure. He's inside the S tier, which would round out 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That rounds out our S tier. So there it is. Our S tier players in the CDL are bang right there, baby. I mean, again, playmaker, the amount of times, even when he struggled, I mean, like think about that check, the raid control where he was like what, double negative and then finished positive, like 32 or whatever it was, 33 and 29 or whatever, when he went 21 and 4 in the last 2 rounds. I mean, that was some mind-blowing stuff from Cammy. Sure, he has his moments where he struggles, and S&D was where he really shined in champs for the most part. Obviously, besides his 4-piece inside kitchen on raid hardpoint and then his raid control, S&D, he made some unbelievable plays at champs. And overall, I think he's just a foundational slaying playmaking piece for this team. He's a beast. I talked way too long about him. Shawnee's up next. I'm going to throw Shawnee inside the E tier. I think he's in a tough spot for a roster spot next year. I don't know if I necessarily see it. London would be the spot, of course, where he would find that team still. It depends what they want to do with Paul X and with, you know, the potential of the future AM players coming in here as well. We're going to be talking about in a second. There's a lot of interesting aspects for Shawnee. I'll keep him in the E tier for now. Sky's up next. A tier player. I think Sky's is a beast. I really, really do. I'll get his rotations any single time. You guys saw that one on Twitter, but shout out Sky's on the map. Sky's, his positioning is elite. His anticipation is fantastic. He's a playmaker. He finds those streaks. He makes big time plays. But not only that, but when Florida was at their best, he was helping Neptune and Havoc around the maps. He was doing all those things. Now Havoc and Neptune were playing off of Skies really, really well. I think Skies can be a foundational AR for basically any team in the CDL. And he's right there with the best ARs in the CDL. Like look at that A tier right now. It's stacked. So Skies is fantastic. I'm a big Skies fan and think he's a fantastic player. Scump is up next. Dude, Scump is elite. That is facts. That is guaranteed. He had his best season in a while. I mean, debatably since like IW. I mean, really, thinking back to like, you know, World War II, BO4, maybe. S&D was a top 5, top 6 S&D player on the year. Literally unbelievable. He's as clutch as it gets. He's a playmaker. Hardpoint was a little bit of a question mark for Scump on the season. And so that's where I'm still a little bit hesitant overall, but we saw him make those plays. We saw him on raid going nuts. We saw him at champs being in Scump form. And so I would still have him inside my top 13 for sure. He's one of the top 3 players inside the A tier. It's just the thing is the S tier is just absolutely stacked. And there's just some unbelievably good players in CoD right now. So that's why Scump is just barely missing out on the S tier, but he is an elite player for sure. So Zaptius is up next. I'm gonna keep Zaptius in the E tier. I think just a little bit of the struggles overall from Paris and from him changing rosters. And then Alex as well, he is inside the E tier. So I think that's all of the players who are currently starters in the CDL. We're like, what, 40 minutes into this video? Oh my word, guys. We're gonna have to fly through these last few guys. But again, we have a lot of guys in the B tier, but again, you'll see how this kind of plays out here, where I feel like the top 3 tiers are guys who really are in a good spot to get rosters next year, who basically are locks. I mean, everyone inside the B tier, I feel like is a lock, unless you want to debate that Afro's not a lock yet, or maybe Neptune's not a lock yet. Maybe Slasher would be the other guy that you could look at. But besides that, everybody else are guaranteed locks for rosters next year. And I would still say Afro's for sure getting a spot. I would say that Neptune's for sure getting a spot. And then Slasher would be the one guy where you're like, okay, maybe if a team doesn't want to build around him, then maybe he doesn't fit into a team because there's only 12 main ARs in the CDL. And that would be tough stuff for him. So that would be the only argument I can see if you're not getting a roster. Besides that, C tier with those guys, you know, Paul X, I think deserves a spot. I think Pristini deserves a spot. And Havoc is on the fringe, Temp's on the fringe, and Aqua's on the fringe. But I would want to see Pristini and Paul X for sure in the CDL. So I could see those 2 guys getting sent up into the B tier, but I'll leave them in the C tier for now. So with that said, if you notice, we're missing 1 player inside the A tier. And this is gonna be a hot take, because this guy had his struggles in the season, and then he ended up getting benched. And that's, of course, is Hook. I have Hook inside the A tier as the one bench player to be up here towards the top of the list. I really think that Hook can still be a top 20 player in the CDL. This guy is so talented, and on the right team, he can win a championship. I think that's undeniable. And heading into Vanguard, we saw in Modern Warfare, he won champs. He's a CoD champion with Dallas, and he was so valuable to that team with doing so much of that dirty work, making some massive plays inside champs. And I really think that Hook can do that again in 4v4. So that's where I'm at with it. I think Hook can be there, so I'm gonna send him into the tops. Now let's talk about some of the other non-starters, the guys who got benched on the year, and start slotting them in here. We're gonna move quickly here, not much debate. Zed is the next guy up. I think he has upside here. I like him. He's a C tier player and a guy who can be a contributor on an important team or a very good team in the CDL. Chino's another guy who I could see as a C tier player, but because he's an AR, I mean, you could debate he can flex, but I think he should be an AR. So that's the situation here. If you see him as a flex, I could see the C tier, but as a main AR, I'm gonna put him in the D tier. Decimate is very interesting because of the S&D prowess we saw with him on New York, but I'm gonna leave him in the D tier as well. I think we're gonna have a lot of D tier players here, so he's a guy who I could see, you know, being there as well. Tej is very interesting. There's an argument for him to be higher than this, but I'm gonna have him inside the D tier here. I know some people are gonna be pissed about that with some of the Tej guys out there, but I just think he really struggled. He's got a tough situation right now with finding a roster. I think Slasher would be his key to a roster, maybe Gunless would be his key to a roster potentially. The Rise Nation guys with the argument for a CoD World War II Vanguard situation, you know, I could see that being a situation, but he's gonna be a tough spot for a roster. Fellow's the next guy up. I think Fellow's very good. I actually think Fellow can be still a valuable part to a team. We saw him be great in Modern Warfare in the AM scene. We saw him be great in the AM scene this year in Cold War. And I really think that with the right squad of 4, Fellow can still be a contributor on a very, very good team in the CDL. So Diamond Khan's up next. So Diamond is interesting. He's a fringe DC player for me, which is ironic. That was very ironic. That was a really, really funny pun. And so as for DC, I'm gonna leave him inside the C tiers. I think there's some untapped I've said untapped potential so many times in this video, but I mean, it kind of is. Heading into ROSTERMANIA, the untapped potential is what you're looking for players. And so with Modern Warfare, we saw him be very good in Modern Warfare as well last year with the subliners. And I'm excited to see what he could do this year in Vanguard. I think he could be a very, very good player, and I'm keeping him in there. Accuracy is also a tough one to grade. I could see someone arguing him for him to be in the D tier, but I think as a leader of a team with 3 very good amateur players around him, 3 slaying beasts around him, he could still be there. So I'm gonna leave him near the bottom of the C tier here as a guy who could still, you know, be a contributing player to a team. Also, Zero, very fun player. I really like Zero, and he's near the top of the C tier for me as a guy who could contribute to the London Royal Ravens this season. I hope he gets a spot. Fire's up next, throwing him in the E tier. Venom's up next, and Venom's very interesting, actually. I have him in the D tier here, but I honestly kind of want to put him in the... Can I move him up to the C tier? I want to do that. So I want to move Venom up to the C tier and kind of throw him in there. I could see the argument for him being inside D, but I actually think that there's a situation where he could be very, very good in the CDL still, and he kind of got put in a tough spot with Thieves on this season. Method's up next. I'm also going to throw him inside the C tier. Again, I think he has less likely chance of getting a spot than accuracy. And then a lot of these guys, if I had to project, he's not getting a roster spot this year, which would be tough for Zin City, especially because no min, no Zin. He's not taking no minimum wage. He wants to get the bag. So we'll see. We'll see. Parasite, very fun debate. I want Parasite to get a spot. I would love to see him on a Surge with Phoenix. So him and Phoenix battling it out, duking it out, getting into arguments together, and building a team of super AMs together would be a lot of fun. I'd love to see that. Or maybe just pick him up for Paris, and Paris just picks up Paris picks up Parasite. I mean, that's beautiful. That's a marriage in the making. Make it happen, Paris. Let's go. Dylan's up next. And we got Slacked. And so Slacked is in the D tier. And yeah, I think Slacked after Florida, it wasn't a perfect situation for him. I mean, I'm not sure what team would work for him to be like to really find a spot this year. So overall, I think he's kind of in this mix of a lot of guys who are in a tough spot heading into challengers next year. And that's what gets there. So, all right, now we got some guys. Those are all the guys who saw the starting time this year in the CDL. Now we got a few guys, quite a few guys, who I want to at least mention here as guys who could potentially get picked up heading into next year. And this is why it's crazy. Again, there's 48 spots. Please give us expansion teams. Please, COD gods, give us expansion teams because there's 48 spots. Again, we have the top, what? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We have the top 34 here in the 3 tiers, the top 3 tiers. There's diamonds in the rough here with C and D, and I'm excited to see who that ends up being heading into next year. These are guys who did not see the starting roles this year, but I think could get picked up next year. I'll start with Wuskin. I'm gonna throw Wuskin inside the D tier. It's a tough spot with him. I mean, again, last time we saw a Modern Warfare-like game, the dude was a freaking unit on the map. So I think he's worth picking up and giving a go, but I'm not willing to put him higher than D tier right now, considering he basically barely played COD this year. Sib is up next. He's a guy who I want to throw at least in the C tier. I think he's going to get a spot. So he's one guy that I feel like is going to get a spot. And I can definitely see the upside with Sib. He dominated in a lot of maps this year in the AM scene as a guy who took over games. And I'm excited to see what Sib can do this year. I think he could go to a lot of different teams, but we'll see. We have, spoiler, you know, we have him going to New York. We'll see. We'll see. All right, PD's up next. This guy, or PD, Nasty's up next. Nasty is another guy who I think is going to get a spot with London. And I really think he deserves it. Dude, he fried this year. He was a beast in the AM scene. And also, you know, a little note here. I'm not going to act like I sat here and watched hours and hours and hours and hours of challengers. I sat and watched a lot of the champs. I watched, you know, some of the cups here and there. I watched individual player streams like Methods or whoever was streaming at the time. I definitely watched, but I was by no means watching every single one of the games. I'm here taking notes all day on the CDL. I just straight up don't have time. I wish I did. And I really like some of these guys, and Nasty in the games that I saw has a lot of potential. Same goes for Mohawk, and he didn't have a picture on COD Gamepedia, so I'm just using his name. We'll see. But Mohawk has a lot of potential. I mean, from Champs, we saw him play unbelievably well, and that probably got him a roster spot from his performance at CoD Champs. He could be the next Standy. I think it's very possible for a guy like that. The star player on a team of a lot of vets who wins challengers, just like last year with Standy and that squad. So that's very possible. Also another EU player who could see sometime, Harry. I'm not as excited for Harry as I am for Nasty, so I'm gonna throw Harry inside the D tier. But again, I could see people arguing that the other way. I could see him being inside the C tier. So very fair for you European fans out there. Don't hate me, I'm sorry. Pander's up next. I'm gonna throw him in the D tier as well. A guy who we saw last year and who got a really unfair chance for the Surge. And I could see him deserving or getting a shot again this year. Pentagram's another guy. I'm gonna throw him inside the E tier for now as a guy who is in the mix. There's gonna be a lot of guys in the E tier, I think, with mixy guys who have a chance this year to get a spot at some point. Yeez, a sub for Florida. I'm not as excited for Yeez as I am for like Sib or Nasty, but I also am pretty excited for Yeez though, after what we saw with him playing with Parasite. I'm gonna put him in the C tier actually. I'm gonna move Mohawk over here so we can just kind of read his name, but I'm actually gonna put Yeez inside the C tier. Again, it's a little bit different with these guys versus some of the established COD pros, where like a guy like, you know, Paul X, I could see him being in a different tier than Yeez, considering Yeez has never even played in the CDL. So if someone wants to put these guys in the D tier, I'm totally fine with that. But I'm just kind of like saying, kind of tiering these guys as the amateur players who I'm very excited for the potential, the upside play. It's like the ROSTERMANIA tier list. That's why they're here. Saints is another guy who played great this year, and I think he deserves to be on this list. I'll throw him inside the D tier. Royalty, another guy who, I mean, for years now, former pro, been in the AM scene now for 2 years. He has been fantastic, and I really would love to see him get a chance to be in the CDL again. And same goes with Exotic. I'm not sure where he is on this list. Same with Exotic. Both of those guys, basically duos. They've been together for a long time now playing. And I would love to see them get picked up and by a CDL team. It would probably take an expansion though. And I think they could be guys who could make a run. Same goes for Kismet. Kismet's a guy with BBG this year who I really was impressed with. I don't know if I should keep him in the E. I'll leave him in the E tier for now, but I could see him going there. Gravity, I mean, he deserves a shot. He's been one of the winningest players for many years now in the CDL's AM scenes. And I would love to see him get a chance. Spart is there as well. I mean, again, he was very good inside Champ, so I could see somebody putting him a little bit higher on the list as well. I'll put Spart inside the D tier. Of course, he was on LAG last year, but did not play well and ended up getting benched again. So I don't know. I'm a little bit lower on Spart than maybe some people in the AM scene. Pred. All right, here we are with Pred. Pred, I think, deserves a shot at this point. He has literally dominated. He's been the all-star of the APAC scene, which is, of course, Australia, for a while now. I think he deserves a chance this year, and I think he's going to go to Paris or maybe Seattle as a team, maybe, you know, because I could see, you know, Phoenix taking a shot on him. Glow Frosty, aka Hamza, is up next. And he's another dude who's won so much in the AM scene, and I would love to see him get a shot in the CDL. And then we've got Vortex, of course, Team War, a guy who's been on a lot of teams the past few years. I really like Vortex, and I would love to see him get a shot in the European scene. And then, yeah, like I said, Pred. So there it is. Oh, we also got Proloot. Proloot, I'll throw, I guess, in the D tier. I don't know, C tier. All right. There it is. There's our list of all pros. I'm not going to leave it up for very long because I don't want people skipping to this point. So if you're skipping right now, go back to the video, go back and maybe listen to the whole thing and, you know, maybe get a better feel for why I put guys where I put the guys. And again, this list is very different from my other tier lists on the year. We're not doing it with the same criteria, considering we have to project a little bit heading into ROSTERMANIA, heading into Vanguard. So there's a lot more variables, and you have to rely on some of the players' history for why they're going to be an S tier or whatever, you know, B tier, A tier, and give them those tiebreakers. So overall, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of comments. Drop all your comments down below where you agree with me, where you disagree with me about some guys that maybe I didn't leave off, where I left off the list that you maybe think deserve a chance this year. and some of the AM guys, some of the other European, maybe APAC guys that I didn't have on the list. I know there's a lot of really deserving guys that aren't even mentioned. Whalers, Brezzy. I mean, I don't know. There's just a lot of guys. If I sat here naming them all, we'd be here all day. So I want to see expansion teams. I want to see some of those expansion teams take chances on challengers players. I definitely want that to be a thing, and it should be a thing, and they deserve a chance. I mean, some of the singularity guys, Bids, I don't even have Bids on the list. Bids is the guy who I want to put in the D tier, so just put Bids in the D tier. He deserves a chance. There's a lot of guys that deserve a chance, man, and we need some expansion teams to give those guys a chance. So, or we need an open tournament so these AM teams can come and compete and beat the pro teams in the biggest stages. So please give us those things as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Drop a comment down below. Drop all your hot takes down below. Of course, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Go check out our podcast, our ROSTERMANIA predictions podcast, and there's gonna be a lot more ROSTERMANIA on the channel soon. And watch out, 1v1 me bro is returning soon. All right, so be on the lookout. We have a special guest coming in as our next guest for 1v1 me bro. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Share the video, guys really enjoyed it. But as always, guys, I'm your boy SalvationsElite, and we'll see you next time. I'm out.